Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this installment of our video series with ASCO. I'm Amara Rosgis with Consulting Specifying Engineer and CFE Media and Technology, and I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about a variety of different topics. And I'm with Russell Senesac again, who is thrilled to be here today, right, Russell?
I am absolutely thrilled.
Awesome. Well, for a little bit of background, Russell did begin his career with APC in 1996, and he's held several different positions over the past 25 years, including sales, product management, and strategy. His concentration has traditionally been in mission-critical applications, specifically within data center and edge environments. Within the Schneider Electric portfolio, Russell has most recently been focused on market trends, disruptions, and collaborating with R&D teams to solve the challenges faced by the partner and end user communities. Just recently, Russell broadened his focus to include the rapidly developing new energy landscape, which includes electrical source management, distribution, and load prioritization. So Russell, we've touched on a little bit of this before, but we're going to get deeper today in a couple of different things. So we recently did a research study, Consulting Specifying Engineer, and we asked about the major drivers around the adoption of battery energy storage systems. Not a surprising topic. Sustainability and financial incentives were high on the response list. Can you give us a little bit more perspective of why we're seeing those sustainability and financial incentives drive this adoption?
Sure. So this is the here comes the batteries, I think, episode for us, right? So we've talked a lot in the past about things have been generators and transfer switches, and hey, what are these battery energy storage systems and these inverters that are showing up now in the electrical architecture? And there are probably, I would say, 3 or 4 major drivers here, and that's what we're really going to talk about today. So when you look at this, in terms of what really hit the top of the radar screen, I think the sustainability initiatives, I would use this term ESG, right? Environmental Sustainable Governance, didn't exist. ESG departments didn't exist 20 years ago. Chief Sustainability Officer didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think that what you're seeing in the marketplace itself at a macro level is this pressure to be greener, right? I don't think you can throw a stone and hit a company that hasn't set a carbon neutral, net neutral, green by a certain date that's out there. And so it goes without saying that one of the major focuses immediately becomes energy, right? Where do we get it? How do we consume it? And so the electrical system is key to understanding what opportunities that unlocks. And so those ESG departments, those sustainability initiatives, those really drive the adoption of these, we call them distributed energy resources, these DERs. And in those DERs, there are quite a few different versions of it, right? There's solar, there's batteries, there's wind, there's compressed air, there's fuel cells, and I'm sure there'll be more. And what's interesting about the battery energy storage piece is that typically it's being adopted for use with the photovoltaic, which is the solar version. And so solar is the least expensive way to be able to make electricity, bar none. And there's a ton of incentives that are out there. We'll talk about incentives in a second. But what's happening is obviously the sun doesn't always shine when you want it to shine. And so as a result, people are adopting these battery energy storage systems to be able to capture and store that energy so that when you need it, it'll be available to you versus you don't want to turn your solar down because it's such a low cost way to be able to create it in a very renewable way. So what gets real interesting will be though is, and we'll talk about this in just a second, is when you look at the resiliency that you can get from a battery energy storage system. So what we hear most times would be is we bought a PV system. We got a battery energy storage system to be able to optimize it, and it's Tuesday and the sun is shining and the power went out and we have no power. Like, why don't we have power? And it's the battery energy storage system that's capable of solving that equation. So we'll talk about that when we get to the resiliency piece. But let me hit the incentives piece real quick, just because this one's a pretty easy one to understand. Number one is the cost of these systems have come down dramatically. So if you look at the cost of these battery energy storage systems, solar systems, et cetera, they used to be quite expensive. And so the cost to manufacture them, to produce them, post-COVID supply chain issues kind of in the rearview mirror, it's become very economical to be able to play in the space. The second piece that goes along with that would be is if you look at any of the money that's being allotted at the federal level, the state, local level, even utilities are all driving incentives for people to be able to make these adoptions. So more often than not, we hear a story of, hey, there was money available. I had an initiative within the company to go do it, and we did it. And now we need to go figure out how to use it. And so it's almost like a cart before the horse a little bit. And so what we're trying to do as an industry is obviously to get in front of the cart, right, with the horse, and be able to help lead and educate and drive not only the decisions to adopt, but how to be able to make that adoption. And so we talked about funding. We talked about the sustainability piece. The resiliency is an interesting discussion for us to be able to look at.
Sure, sure. So I've had a lot of discussions with you and your Schneider Electric colleagues, and I understand there are some emerging drivers of BESS adoption that's accelerating in the market.
Yep.
One of those drivers, like you just said, is resiliency. And our research shows that more than 50% of clients are requiring some sort of emergency standby or backup power.
Yeah, it's so here's the key to this whole thing is we spent decades, right, making things as resilient and as robust as we could, right? A lot of that had to do with generators and UPSs and transfer switches and codes and standards and making sure power goes out, that we've got resilient, robust power available. That can't take a back seat, right? And to become more sustainable, right? It's got to be an and statement. It's got to be, I need it to be sustainable, and I expect it to have the same rigor, robustness that I have come to expect in this space, for decades. And so one of the interesting things here is you can kind of get an idea of the percentages in terms of the fact that they require it. I can tell you that average is growing, right? So that average used to be lower, used to be below 50%. And it doesn't take you long to understand what drives that, because if you think about the digital nature of our livings today, everything's digital, right? My banking's digital, my maps is digital, I order, and I don't want a poor service experience in any of it. Like, I want it to be the same level of experience. In fact, I sometimes demand more because I want it to be available when I'm available. I want it to be able to go faster. So you think about 5G and where we're going with robotics, and artificial intelligence is the latest, right, version of these things. You see all kinds of chatbot type of discussions that are out there. It's accelerating, right? It's getting faster and faster and more digital. And so you're going to continue to see the expectations and the number of resilient platforms continue to increase. It used to just be the operating theater in the hospital was the only 7x24 mission critical thing that was out there. And I could tell you, my kids would put up a very strong argument that the network in our house is the most critical network that must be available. So it's amazing to watch the growing need of resiliency here. So you got two, they're not independent vectors, but it's got to be resilient and it's got to be sustainable moving forward. And that's what's driving now a lot of this fast adoption of these new energy landscape type of sources, like solar, like battery, like wind, like fuel cell, et cetera.
But are we sacrificing resiliency? Are we giving anything up here?
So it is a good question. And I think that what the industry is looking to be able to clearly understand has to be what is required to keep that same level of resiliency. So we talked about the codes of the ESG piece of it, right? The environmental, the compliance type stuff. We talked about there being a lot of money out there. We even talked about the need for getting more resilient. What we haven't necessarily talked a lot about yet is the actual codes and standards industry, right? Because really, when you kind of tear it all down, codes and standards, people like UL and NEMA and NEC, NFPA, all these alphabet soup type acronyms, right? Those are all agencies that are there and have been there for a long time, and they're there to be able to help support that safety and rigor and robustness of that reliability. And here's the general challenge: is that we're in a space right now where the technology is moving faster than some of these cycles of development, right? So if you look at like National Electric Code, it's updated every 3 years. When you think about like where your iPhone was 3 years ago, right, and what kind of features and capabilities we have today, it would be quite a leap. And so we need to be able to quickly learn about what these technologies are and how to safely and robustly implement codes and standards to be able to help ensure the reliability. So the picture you see there in the lower right, that's affectionately referred to as a duck curve in California. It looks like the tail of the duck on one side and the head of the duck of the other, and then the body in the middle. And what it's showing is that there's been such a massive adoption of solar in California that they actually have to turn the solar down in the middle of the day. So what you're seeing in the belly of the curve is the amount of consumption, the amount of reduction that they have to do of the solar in order to be able to keep everything stable in the middle of the day, because there's so much of it. But then you can see when everybody goes home at night, the amount of required power goes way up past where obviously the sun has now set. And so in order to be able to flatten that curve, you need to be able to implement battery energy storage systems, right? So this is what we talked about earlier. The sun is out, we use what we need, and whatever we don't need, we charge the battery with, such that when the sun goes down, then we get to use the power that's stored in the battery, and then tomorrow we rinse and repeat, right? And it's a very, very sustainable way for us to be able to take advantage of the energy that we create via solar. And it helps flatten that curve. And so what California has done is basically said, listen, any new construction that you're going to do in California of a building that's greater than 5,000 square feet must be equipped with solar and battery. And so that's California's way now of kind of getting out in front of this and saying, listen, we fully support the idea of energy being more sustainable and being economically available and things like that, but we can't do it without having some sort of rigor around it to ensure that we're not throttling things up and down and making things unstable. So that's what they call the duck curve, and that's what they call Title 24, the energy code in California. That's legally binding. You can't get a building permit without being Title 24 compliant, and that's where this says, hey, you gotta be able to have battery and solar to help out the system.
Wow. Well, thank you for that in-depth description of everything.
Here come the
Senesac.
batteries.
Yes, here come the batteries. Thank
Yep.
you. I do appreciate your time today, Russell, and we are going to get a little bit deeper into this topic. So please join us next time as we continue to talk about resiliency and batteries and even more. Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us today.